if you've ever stood in front of a government building in India or handled a rupee note or just, really looked at the Indian flag, you've engaged with the ghost of a man who died over 2,000 years ago.
It's completely inescapable. That navy blue wheel right in the center of the flag, that's the Ashoka chakra.
The Wheel of Dharma.
Exactly. And the four lions standing back to back, roaring out at the four compass points, the lion capital. It's on currency, it's on passports, it's the state emblem.
Right. And these are the absolute bedrock symbols of the modern Indian state. They're meant to represent law and order, sovereignty, peace.
They do, which is what makes the story so jarring.
And that's exactly where the paradox hits you. Because the man behind those symbols, the man who commissioned them, he didn't exactly start out as a poster child for peace.
Not even close. If we're to believe the ancient records, his early resume reads less like a saint and more like, well, a horror movie villain.
That's quite the juxtaposition, isn't it?
It is. We're talking about Ashoka the Great, the third emperor of the Mauryan dynasty, reigning roughly from 268 to 232 BCE. And you're right, long before he was the benevolent Dharmaraja, the righteous king, he was widely known as Chandashoka.
Which translates to?
Ashoka the Fierce. Or, if you want to be a bit more visceral about it, Ashoka the Cruel.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources here. Archaeological survey reports, translations of rock edicts, and some very colorful ancient Buddhist chronicles.
Very colorful.
And we are going to unpack one of history's most dramatic transformation stories. How does a guy who allegedly killed 99 of his own brothers and built a literal torture chamber end up becoming the world's first great pacifist emperor?
And perhaps just as importantly, we need to navigate a very tricky source problem. Because when it comes to Ashoka, we're often looking at two completely different people depending on which text you pick up.
I want to get into that immediately.
Yeah.
It feels like we have the historical Ashoka and then the legendary Ashoka, and they don't always agree with each other.
Yeah. They rarely do. I mean, on one hand, you have the historical Ashoka. This is the man we know from his own words.
The edicts.
Yes, the edicts. Imagine an autobiography, but instead of being written in a book, it's carved into massive rocks and beautifully polished sandstone pillars scattered all over the Indian subcontinent. We're talking from the mountains of Afghanistan all the way down to the tropical south.
An autobiography in stone. That's a bold move for any leader.
It's ancient propaganda. I mean, let's be honest about it, but maybe in the best sense of the word. In these inscriptions, Ashoka sounds incredibly reasonable, paternalistic even.
What kind of image is he projecting?
The image of a moral polity. He talks constantly about Dhamma, this ethical code. He apologizes for the suffering caused by his wars. He worries about the welfare of his subjects, both human and animal, almost like a nervous father.
Okay, so that's Ashoka number one. The benevolent, thoughtful ruler, speaking to us from the stone. But then we have the sources for Ashoka number two.
Oh, yes, the legendary Ashoka. This version of him comes from Buddhist texts written centuries after he died. We're mainly looking at the Ashoka from the North Indian tradition and the Mahavamsa from Sri Lanka.
And these weren't written by impartial historians.
Not at all. These were written by monks. And we have to remember, these writers had a very specific agenda. They weren't trying to write a history textbook.
Let me guess. They were writing a conversion story.
Exactly. To show the miraculous, transformative power of the Buddhist teachings, they needed a before picture that was as dark and twisted as possible. The worse Ashoka was before he found the faith, the more violent, the more cruel, the more powerful his transformation seems.
So they turned him into an absolute monster to make the religion look like the superhero that tamed the beast.
Precisely. It's a common trope in religious writing and hagiography, this sinful before, saintly after narrative. So as we walk through his life today, we have to constantly ask ourselves, okay, did this actually happen, or is this just the legend trying to make a point?
It's amazing we can even ask these questions, though. I mean, considering he was basically lost to history for nearly 2,000 years, that part of the story is incredible.
It's one of the most fascinating bits of historical detective work. For centuries, people in India would walk past these massive polished pillars covered in this beautiful, strange writing, and nobody had a clue who put them there.
So the script was completely dead.
Completely. The Brahmi script had been totally forgotten. The locals had wild theories. Some people thought they were the walking sticks of mythical giants from the Mahabharata, like Bhima.
That's amazing. And then enter the codebreaker.
Yes, James Prinsep. It's 1837. Prinsep is a brilliant British scholar and an official at the mint in Calcutta, and he becomes completely obsessed with these inscriptions. He spends years painstakingly comparing the scripts, analyzing the patterns, and finally, he cracks it. He deciphers Brahmi.
That must have been an Indiana Jones moment. Suddenly, all these silent stones across the subcontinent start speaking.
They did, but they spoke in a riddle, because Prinsep translated the edicts, but the king signing them never says, I, Ashoka. He uses a title,
Divanam Priya Priyadansan.
which means beloved of the gods, he who regards amiably. Very nice title, but not a name. For a while, Prinsep and other scholars actually thought they were reading about a king from Sri Lanka who is mentioned in the chronicles there.
So they had the words, but they'd assigned them to the wrong guy.
Exactly. The connection wasn't made. The final puzzle piece didn't click into place until much later, in 1915.
What happened in 1915?
An archaeologist found another smaller edict at a place called Maski in southern India. This one was less formal, and it read, clear as day, Divanam Priya Ashoka.
There it is, the smoking gun.
That was it. And just like that, the mysterious, benevolent author of the Pillars and the legendary fratricidal tyrant of the Buddhist texts were confirmed to be the very same person.
Wow. And that rediscovery allows us to piece his whole life together.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the very beginning. Before the piece, before the pillars. Let's talk about the ugly duckling prince.
The sources are pretty mean about his appearance, aren't they?
They're shockingly blunt.
The Ashokavadana explicitly says his skin was rough and unappealing to the touch. And because of this, his father, the Emperor Bindusara, apparently couldn't stand him. He doted on his other sons, especially the handsome and charismatic heir apparent Susima.
So Ashoka is immediately the outcast in his own family.
Huh.
But he clearly has that, that chip on his shoulder energy. There's this story about the Golden Pavilion test that sounds straight out of a fable.
It really does. The legend says Bindusara wants to figure out who should succeed him, so he brings all the princes together to this golden pavilion. He asks an ascetic, a sort of holy man and fortune teller named Pingalavatsajjiva, to predict who is worthy to be the next king.
And you have to visualize the scene, right? The other princes, they're all rolling up on decorated elephants, wearing silks, eating fine food.
And Ashoka shows up on an old, tired elephant, wearing dirty clothes, eating boiled rice and curds from an earthen pot. He looks the part of the loser.
He's the odd one out.
Yes, but he has the confidence of a winner. The ascetic goes through a series of questions. Who has the best mount? All the other princes point to their fancy animals. Ashoka shouts, I do.
And his reasoning.
It's pure confidence. He does the same for everything. Who has the best seat? I do. The earth is my seat. Who has the best food? I do. He's basically declaring himself the winner because he believes he is.
He's just manifesting it.
And the ascetic sees it. He recognizes that this raw, unshakable self-belief is the mark of a future king. But he has a problem.
He can't say it out loud.
He can't. He knows if he points at Ashoka and says it's him, Emperor Bindusara might just kill the boy on the spot to prevent the prophecy. So he deflects, he gives a vague answer, and tells Ashoka's mother later in secret.
So Ashoka knows he's the chosen one, but he's walking a tightrope. And usually when you have a troublesome, ambitious prince, you send him far, far away.
Exactly. He was made viceroy of the difficult provinces. He was sent to govern Ujjain, a major center, and then, crucially, to Taxila.
Taxila, modern-day Pakistan. This was a major intellectual and trade hub, but it was also rebellious.
Very, and the legend about his mission there is fantastic. The story goes that Bindusara, still trying to get rid of him, sent Ashoka there with a massive army cavalry, elephants, chariots, but deliberately refused to give them any weapons.
Go fight a war, son. Good luck. No swords for you. That's not just neglect, that's a death sentence.
It was almost certainly a setup, but the text says Ashoka just addresses his troops and declares, if my merit is such that I am to be king, then weapons will appear, and lo and behold.
The earth opens up, and the gods provide the weapons.
The earth opens up, and a fully armed arsenal emerges.
Okay, that is clearly the legendary Ashoka kicking in big time.
Definitely. This is the monks making him a divine figure, but the historical kernel is that he was sent to govern these volatile regions. He was getting real-world administrative and military experience while his brothers were lounging at the capital, Pataliputra. He was learning how the empire actually worked and how to control it.
And that experience pays off when his father, Bindusara, finally falls ill and dies. Because we do not get a smooth handover of power. We get a civil war.
A brutal, bloody war of succession. The Buddhist texts, both the northern and southern traditions, are very clear on this. They claim that Ashoka killed 99 of his half-brothers.
99. That number again, it just seems so mathematically precise.
It's a symbolic number. It almost certainly just means all the competition. He systematically eliminated every other claimant to the throne. The texts say he spared only one, his full uterine brother Tissa.
But the death of the main rival, the heir apparent Susima, is described in horrific detail.
It is. The story says Ashoka's chief minister, a man named Radhagupta, who is sort of the Machiavellian mastermind behind Ashoka's rise, sets a trap. He has a pit dug at the city gate, fills it with live charcoal, and covers it with a thin mat.
The trap.
He then goads Susima into a rage, and as Susima charges in to confront Ashoka, he falls straight into the fiery pit and is burned alive.
That is just gruesome.
It is. And this brings us to the absolute peak of his Chandashoka phase. Once he secures the throne through this bloodshed, the legends say he didn't mellow out, he got worse, which is when we have to talk about Ashoka's hell.
I was reading the notes on this, and it sounds like something straight from a Hieronymus Bosch painting. A prison that was designed to look like a beautiful palace.
Exactly. The idea was to lure people in. From the outside, it was supposed to be a paradise, beautiful architecture, lovely gardens, a place of pleasure. But the moment you stepped inside, the gates locked. It was a high-tech torture chamber.
And he appointed a special executioner to run it, a man named Girika.
Yes. And this Girika guy had a specific contract, a boon he asked of the king.
Which was?
That anyone who entered the gates of that prison for any reason could never leave alive, not even the emperor himself. Inside, the texts describe all sorts of horrific tortures. People being boiled alive in cauldrons of water, blood, and marrow until their bones dissolved. They describe Ashoka visiting just to watch, fascinated by the creativity of the suffering.
And there are other stories from this period too, right? Just insane acts of cruelty, like beheading 500 ministers.
Because they failed to cut down some trees fast enough for his liking, he saw it as disobedience and had them all executed.
And burning 500 concubines alive?
Yes, that story is particularly cruel. The women of his harem were supposedly mocking his rough skin. They compared him to an Ashoka tree, which has rough bark, and stripped its leaves. He took it as a deep personal insult and had all 500 of them burned to death.
Okay, expert analysis time. We need to ground this. Did he actually build a literal torture palace? Did he actually boil people for fun?
Look, most historians agree these specific stories are almost certainly gross exaggerations. We've never found any archaeological evidence of a so-called hell prison.
And the numbers seem suspect?
The numbers 500 ministers, 500 concubines, 99 brothers, they're formulaic. They just mean a lot. It's a literary device.
So why tell these stories if they're not true? Why paint him as such a monster?
It goes right back to that before and after contrast we talked about. The Buddhist monks wanted to show that their faith could tame a literal demon. If Ashoka was just a regular bad king, his conversion is, well, it's nice. But if he was a monster who built a torture palace, his conversion is a full-blown miracle.
But the reputation for cruelty probably has some basis, in fact.
Oh, absolutely. You don't seize control of a massive empire in a contested succession without spilling an enormous amount of blood. He was likely a ruthless, cold-blooded pragmatist who purged all his rivals, and he ruled that way for 8 years.
Exactly. Until Kalinga.
Until Kalinga. This is the turning point, the moment the entire script of his life flips.
So set the scene for us. What was Kalinga?
Kalinga was a powerful, independent kingdom on the east coast of India in the region of modern-day Odisha. It was prosperous, it controlled key land and sea trade routes between the north and south, and it had consistently refused to submit to Mauryan rule.
It was the one that got away.
It was the last major holdout. And in Ashoka's 8th regnal year, roughly 260 BCE, he decided he'd had enough. He launched a massive, full-scale invasion.
And this wasn't just a skirmish? This was a slaughter.
The statistics Ashoka himself gives us, carved in his own words in Major Rock Edict 13, are just staggering. He claims 100,000 people were killed in the action itself.
100,000. In the ancient world, that number is almost incomprehensible.
It is. And he continues. He says many times that number died of other causes, disease, starvation, infected wounds. And on top of that, 150,000 people were captured and deported.
So you're talking about the effective destruction of an entire society.
The complete annihilation of Kalinga as a political entity.
Right? Usually when a king conquers a new land, the inscriptions are all about glory. I came, I saw, I conquered. Look how mighty and powerful I am.
And Ashoka does the absolute opposite. It's what makes this edict one of the most remarkable documents in world history. He issues a public apology.
An apology for winning a war.
A full-throated confession of guilt. In Rock Edict 13, he writes that the conquest of Kalinga caused him profound sorrow and regret. He vividly describes the slaughter, the death, the wailing of the widows and orphans. He specifically mentions his grief over the suffering of the Brahmins and holy ascetics who are caught in the crossfire.
He's admitting fault, publicly, in stone, for all eternity.
It's unheard of. For an absolute monarch at the height of his power to admit that his greatest military victory was actually a source of shame. It's like a PR suicide note, but he immortalized it across his empire.
And this is where the popular conversion narrative usually kicks in, right? The story we see in movies is that Ashoka walks the battlefield, he sees the river of blood, and in that instant, he drops his sword and becomes a pacifist.
Right, the instantaneous, dramatic conversion on the battlefield.
But history is rarely that neat.
It's almost never that neat. And the evidence from his own inscriptions suggests it was a much more gradual process. In his minor rock edicts, Ashoka himself admits that he had been a lay follower of Buddhism and Upasaka for over 2 years before the Kalinga War.
So he was a casual Buddhist first. He was already sort of interested.
Exactly. But he says himself he wasn't very zealous or serious about it. So Kalinga wasn't the event that introduced him to Buddhism. It seems to have been the catalyst that moved him from casual interest to radical application.
The trauma of what he'd done forced him to take the philosophy seriously.
It forced him to wrestle with what he had done and determine how he wanted to rule going forward. It wasn't an overnight change. It was a process.
And there are some interesting alternative stories about his conversion, too, specifically the one involving his nephew.
Yes, the monk Nigroda. This is from the Sri Lankan tradition. Nigroda is the son of Sumana, who was Ashoka's eldest brother, the one he had killed to take the throne.
Oh, wow.
This story says Ashoka, now emperor, sees this young, serene monk walking calmly through the street. He's struck by his peaceful demeanor, invites him into the palace, and is so impressed by his teachings that he converts.
The irony is just incredible. The peace he's searching for comes from the son of the man he murdered.
It adds this deeply personal layer of redemption to the political one. So whether it was the battlefield trauma or the influence of his nephew or a combination of everything, the result is the same. Ashoka changes the entire philosophy of his empire. He introduces the policy of Dhamma.
Let's unpack Dhamma, because when I hear that word, I immediately think of religion. I think of Buddhism.
Awesome.
Was he just trying to convert everyone in his empire?
That's a common misconception. We need to be careful here. Dhamma is the Pali word for the Sanskrit dharma. And yes, in a purely Buddhist context, it means the Buddhist teachings.
But Ashoka was using it differently.
As emperor, he broadened its meaning. He wasn't trying to create a theocracy. He was trying to create a moral polity.
A social code. A set of ethics for the entire empire.
Exactly. It was built on a few key pillars: social concern for the welfare of others, absolute religious tolerance, a new ecological awareness, and of course the total renunciation of war as an instrument of state policy. He wanted to create a society based on conscience, not just on law enforcement.
So what did that actually look like on the ground? If I'm a regular person living in the Mauryan Empire in 250 BCE, how does my life change under this new policy?
It changed physically, for one. Ashoka began to build what we might call an ancient welfare state. His edicts talk about planting banyan trees and mango groves along the major roads to provide shade for travelers and food for the hungry.
That's infrastructure.
It is. He dug wells. He built rest houses, he claims, every 800 meters.
Every 800 meters. That's better infrastructure than some highways I've driven on today.
He also established medical treatment facilities. And here's where it gets really revolutionary. He did it for both humans and animals.
Wait. Hospitals for animals in the 3rd century BCE.
State-sponsored veterinary care. It's one of the earliest recorded instances in world history. He imported medicinal herbs and roots specifically for treating animals. This all ties into that deep ecological aspect of his Dhamma.
Which brings us to the royal kitchen. I found this part fascinating.
Right. He starts the change with himself. He boasts in one edict that formerly, thousands of living creatures were slaughtered every single day to provide curries for the royal household.
Thousands a day.
But now, he says, now that this Dhamma rescript is written, the number has been cut down to just 3. 2 peacocks and 1 deer. And he even adds, and the deer, not always.
2 peacocks and a deer. I just love the specificity. It's like, sorry everyone, the feast is canceled. We're on a compassion diet now.
And he even promised that eventually those last 3 would be stopped too. He completely banned royal hunting trips, which was the #1 favorite pastime of ancient kings. Instead of hunting, he went on Dhamma tours, visiting his people.
He also released what was basically an ancient endangered species list, right?
He did. It's in Pillar Edict 5. He issues a list of protected species. He bans the killing of parrots, bats, queen ants, tortoises, porcupines, basically any animal that is neither useful nor edible. He also banned the killing of nursing mothers and their young.
That's astonishingly modern. But laws are just words on a pillar unless someone enforces them. And he didn't just trust people to be good all of a sudden.
No, not at all. He created a whole new class of government officials to oversee this. They were called the Dhamma Mahamadas.
The officers of Dhamma.
The officers of Dhamma, yes.
Which to a modern ear sounds a little bit like the morality police.
And it could be interpreted that way. There's certainly an element of state oversight. But their job descriptions, as outlined in the edicts, were surprisingly progressive.
What were they supposed to do?
They were tasked with looking after the welfare of the aged, the poor, women, and prisoners. They were supposed to investigate cases of wrongful imprisonment and ensure that judicial sentences weren't too harsh. They were also meant to ensure fair treatment across all the diverse sects and communities in the empire.
So they were part social worker, part ombudsman.
And crucially, they were agents of religious tolerance. Ashoka was a devout Buddhist, but his edicts show him actively supporting Brahmins, Jains, and another sect called the Ajivikas. He famously donated the magnificent Barabar caves to Ajivika ascetics, who were rivals to the Buddhists.
So he was putting his money where his mouth was.
His message was clear, and he carved it in stone. Don't trash other people's religions. If you insult someone else's faith, you're actually hurting your own.
That is a level of nuance we could probably still use today.
Indeed. But Ashoka wasn't just content with fixing his own empire. He wanted to export this idea. He became the great missionary king.
And this is where we get the wild legend of the 84,000 stupas.
Yes. The Ashoka Vadana tells this incredible story that he had the original 8 stupas, the mounds containing the Buddha's relics, opened. He then divided the relics up into thousands of portions.
And built 84,000 new stupas to house them across the entire known world in a single day.
In a single day. He used a solar eclipse as a signal to all his builders. The legend says he had a holy elder monk literally stop the sun with his hand to keep the day from ending until the job was finished.
Okay, so the number 84,000 and the single day are obviously legend.
Obviously. But the archaeological reality is that he did ignite a massive building boom. He is credited with building stupas and monasteries everywhere.
And he shifted the primary building material from wood to stone.
Yes. This is a huge shift in Indian architecture. Before Ashoka, most grand structures were timber. Ashoka introduces these massive monolithic sandstone pillars polished to a perfect glass-like finish, the famous Mauryan polish. He wanted his message and these monuments to last forever.
And he didn't just build. He sent people out. He sent ambassadors of Dhamma to the West.
This is his global legacy. His edicts state that he sent envoys to the Hellenistic kingdoms, the successors to Alexander the Great's empire. He even mentions the Greek kings by name.
Who was he writing to?
Antiochus II of the Seleucid Empire in Syria, Ptolemy II of Egypt, Antigonus of Macedonia, Magas of Cyrene, Alexander of Epirus.
So he's writing to the major powers of the Mediterranean world saying, hey, check out this Dhamma thing I'm doing.
Exactly. We don't have records of how the Greeks reacted, but it shows Ashoka saw himself as a major player on the world stage, promoting a universal ethic. But his most successful and enduring mission was much closer to home.
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. And for that mission, he sent his own children.
His son Mahinda and his daughter Sankametta.
Yes. Mahinda established the Buddhist faith there, but Sankametta's contribution is legendary. She carried a sapling of the original Bodhi tree, the very tree the Buddha sat under when he attained enlightenment, all the way to Sri Lanka.
And that tree? Is it still there?
It is. The Jayasri Mahabodhi in the city of Anuradhapura. It is the oldest human-planted tree in the world with a known planting date. It's a direct, living link to the Buddha, and it only survived because of Ashoka's mission.
That's incredible. Without his patronage, Buddhism might have just remained a small local sect in northern India. He made it a world religion.
He absolutely did, and he also tried to clean house internally. He convened the Third Buddhist Council at his capital.
Why? What was the problem?
Apparently, his welfare state was a little too good. The Sangha, the monastic order, was getting filled with fake monks people who were just joining for the free food, robes, and shelter provided by the state.
I'm here for the enlightenment and also the excellent catering.
Exactly. So Ashoka backed a council to purge these heretical or insincere monks from the order and to codify the authentic Buddhist texts. He had to purify the order to save it.
Now, we've painted this picture of a man who seems to have achieved everything. He found peace, he built a massive welfare state, he spread a world religion. But the story doesn't end on that high note, does it?
No, it doesn't. The legends about the later years of Ashoka's life are actually quite tragic. They depict a lonely, frustrated, and ultimately powerless old man. And the family drama returns with a vengeance.
We have to talk about the queens.
Yes. Ashoka had many wives, of course. The only one named in his edicts is Kuruvaki. But the later texts highlight a conflict between two others. A son to Mitra, who is depicted as his pious chief queen and soulmate, and a much younger, later wife named Tishirakshita.
And Tishirakshita, she is the villain of this final act.
She is depicted as deeply vain, ambitious, and jealous. There's a very bizarre story where she becomes jealous of the Bodhi tree.
The tree.
Yes. Ashoka spends so much time and lavishes so much attention worshipping the holy tree that Tishirakshita thinks Bodhi is the name of a mistress he's seeing.
She thinks he's cheating on her with the tree.
So she tries to kill it. She employs a sorceress to use black magic, or in some versions, she ties poisonous thorns around its trunk to destroy her rival.
That's unhinged. But that's not even the worst thing she does. The story of Kunala is just heartbreaking.
It is. Kunala was one of Ashoka's sons, and he was famous for having extraordinarily beautiful eyes. The legend says Tishirakshita, his stepmother, made sexual advances toward him.
And he rejected her.
Kunala, being a virtuous Buddhist prince, politely but firmly rejected her.
And like a classic evil queen in a fairy tale.
She vowed revenge. Years later, when Kunala was serving as viceroy in Taxila, she saw her chance. She forged a royal order using Ashoka's own royal seal while he was asleep or distracted, and sent it to the ministers in Taxila. The order was to blind the prince.
And they did it. They just obeyed in order to blind the emperor's son.
The ministers hesitated, but Kunala himself, believing in the law of karma and obedience to his father, insisted they carry it out. He was blinded.
Unbelievable. What happened when Ashoka found out?
Kunala eventually made his way back to the capital as a blind beggar and musician. When he played his lute in the palace courtyard, Ashoka recognized his voice and the story came out. He was horrified and enraged.
What happened to all the pacifism then?
Well, this is where Ashoka the Fierce, might have made one last brief reappearance. Even though Kunala preached forgiveness, the texts say Ashoka was consumed by rage. He had Tishirakshita brutally tortured and executed. In some versions, he had her burned alive in a house of lacquer.
So the great pacifist emperor ends his reign with one last act of brutal, fiery justice.
It shows the complexity of the man, or at least the complexity of the character the texts wanted to create. It's a cautionary tale showing that even the most pious king is still subject to human suffering, attachment, and rage.
And then we have the final image of his life, the story of the myrobalan fruit.
It's such a powerful symbol of impermanence. The legend says Ashoka is on his deathbed, and he wants to give one last massive donation to the Buddhist Sangha. He tries to sign away the entire state treasury to the monks.
He just wanted to give the whole empire away.
Yes, but his ministers and grandson, who is now the regent, blocked him. They said, "The empire belongs to the heir. We can't let the old king bankrupt the state for religious merit." They cut off his access to the treasury.
So the most powerful man in the world was left with nothing.
Lying on his deathbed, the only thing he actually possessed was the half of a myrobalan fruit that was on his meal tray. A small, sour, medicinal fruit.
And that was his final gift.
He held it in his dying hand, offered it to a monk, and said, "This is all that remains of my sovereignty. This is my entire wealth now. Please take it."
That is a haunting image. The ruler of the subcontinent, the man who commanded armies and built cities, dying with nothing but half a piece of fruit in his palm.
It perfectly underscores the Buddhist theme of his story. Even the greatest Chakravartin, the universal ruler, must leave the world empty-handed.
So let's zoom out. Ashoka dies around 232 BCE. What happens to this grand moral empire he built?
It collapses, and remarkably quickly. Within 50 years of his death, the Mauryan Empire was gone. The very last Mauryan king was assassinated by his own general during a military parade.
50 years. After all that, why did it fall apart so fast? Did Ashoka's pacifism make the state too weak?
That's one of the major historical debates. Some historians argue that by neglecting the army, banning the hunt, and focusing so much on Dhamma, he essentially weakened the military backbone of the state. He made it vulnerable.
Too much carrot, not enough stick.
That's one theory. Another is simply that the empire was too vast and diverse to be held together by one man's moral vision. Once that central, charismatic personality was gone, it just fractured along its natural fault lines.
But while his political empire fell, his cultural conquest succeeded.
It did. Buddhism spread across Asia along the routes his missionaries had established, and his symbols, the wheel and the lions, survived in the cultural memory to be reborn and define a modern nation 2 millennia later.
So what does this all mean? We have a man who was a fratricidal tyrant, then a deeply remorseful convert, then a preachy but effective welfare state administrator, and finally a tragic, powerless old man.
I think the enduring power of Ashoka's story, whether you believe every lurid detail of the legends or stick strictly to the stone edicts, is the possibility of profound change.
That you're not defined by your worst day, even if your worst day was Kalinga.
Exactly. And that political power doesn't have to be solely about brute force and conquest. Ashoka tried a grand experiment. Can you rule a massive, diverse empire through moral persuasion rather than through fear? He didn't succeed perfectly. He was full of contradictions. But he actually tried.
It makes you wonder. We look at the state emblem of India, the lion capital, and the Ashoka chakra on the flag. They come from a man who started as a monster and ended as a ruler who apologized to his subjects. Is true political transformation on that scale even possible today?
That is the question, isn't it? The Ashoka chakra on the flag is supposed to spin to represent progress. But have we actually progressed past the violence of Kalinga, or are we just better at hiding it and rationalizing it?
Something for all of us to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us.
A pleasure, as always.